Aziza had always been a curious soul. From the time she could walk, she had ventured beyond the village borders, finding solace in the thick embrace of the jungle that surrounded her home. The elders would warn her to stay close to the village, where it was safe, but Aziza had never been one to heed warnings easily. It was not that she sought danger, but rather, she felt the call of the unknown, a pull that promised to unlock secrets long buried in the earth. The village of Akokofe had been built on the edge of a vast, untamed jungle. The people of Akokofe had lived in harmony with nature for generations, guided by the wisdom of the elders and the spirits that inhabited the land. It was a place of peace, where the rhythm of life followed the pulse of the seasons, and the presence of the spirits was felt in the wind, the rain, and the soil. Aziza's father, Nkisi, was a well-respected hunter, then her mother, Afia, was a skilled healer. But Aziza was different. While her peers were content with the simple pleasures of village life, Aziza found herself drawn to the stories her grandmother, Nana Ya, told about the old days when the great spirits walked among humans. One such spirit was the Nkisi, a powerful and mysterious force capable of both great destruction and boundless protection. One afternoon, while exploring deep within the jungle, Aziza stumbled upon something strange. Hidden beneath the roots of a towering tree, she discovered a small, intricately carved wooden figure. It was no larger than her palm, but it radiated a strange energy that sent a shiver down her spine. The figure depicted a man with hollow eyes and hands outstretched, as if reaching for something just out of his grasp. Aziza's heart raced as she ran her fingers over the carving, feeling the subtle hum of energy beneath her touch. She had heard stories of the Nkisi, but never had she imagined finding one. Her grandmother had warned her that these figures were not to be trifled with, as they held the power to summon spirits, but also to unleash chaos if mishandled. But Aziza's curiosity won out, and she carefully wrapped the figure in a cloth and returned home. That evening, after the village had settled into the quiet of the night, Aziza went to see Nana Kwaku, the village elder. Nana Kwaku was the wisest person in the village, and she often spoke of the old ways with reverence. Aziza had always been fascinated by his stories, especially those about the Nkisi and the great spirits that once roamed the earth. When Aziza showed him the figure, Nana Kwaku's face grew grave. He took the figure in his hands and studied it carefully, his eyes narrowing as he traced the carvings. "This is an ancient Nkisi," he said quietly. "It has been hidden away for generations, for good reason." Aziza felt a chill in her chest. "What does it do?" Nana Kwaku met her gaze, his voice firm. "The Nkisi is not something to be used lightly, child. It can grant protection, but it can also bring destruction. Only those with wisdom and respect for the spirits can harness its power. I warn you, Aziza, do not let your curiosity lead you down a dangerous path." But Aziza's mind raced with possibilities. She had always dreamed of making a difference in the world, of helping her people in ways that went beyond hunting or healing. The power of the Nkisi could be the key to unlocking that potential. Yet, Nana Kwaku's words echoed in her mind, warning her of the risks. That night, as she lay in bed, Aziza couldn't shake the feeling that the Nkisi was calling to her. She felt its energy pulse through the air, beckoning her to learn more. And so, despite the elders' warnings, she made a decision that would change the course of her life forever. She would seek to unlock the secrets of the Nkisi. Aziza knew the path ahead would not be easy, but she was determined to harness its power. What she didn't yet understand was that unlocking the Nkisi's potential would come at a great cost, one that could not be undone. The days following Aziza's discovery of the Nkisi passed in a blur of restless energy. She spent hours studying the figure, turning it over in her hands, tracing the carved markings. It was as though the relic was alive, its power vibrating against her skin. At night, when the village fell into silence, Aziza would slip into the forest, the Nkisi cradled in her hands, seeking a connection with the spirits that had once walked among her ancestors. It was during one of these solitary nights that Aziza began to hear the whispers. At first, she thought it was the wind rustling through the trees, but the voice was clear, soft and distant, yet unmistakable. It called her name, gentle yet insistent. Aziza. Her heart skipped a beat. She froze, her breath caught in her chest. The voice was coming from the Nkisi. She hesitated for a moment, then spoke aloud. Who are you? The figure in her hands began to glow faintly, the intricate carvings shifting beneath her fingertips. A shadow seemed to emerge from it, coiling and twisting in the air before her. I am Esi, the voice replied, its tone both ancient and wise. I have been trapped within this vessel for centuries, waiting for one such as you to release me. Aziza's pulse quickened. The idea that the spirit was truly speaking to her both thrilled and terrified her. What do you want from me? Esi's laugh was a soft, musical sound, like a breeze whispering through the trees. I seek nothing from you, Aziza. You, however, have the power to release me. The Nkisi is a bridge between the living and the spiritual realms. It holds the power to protect or destroy, depending on the heart of the one who wields it. Aziza trembled slightly as the weight of her decision settled upon her. She had always known there was something ancient and powerful about the Nkisi, but now she understood that it was not simply an object, it was a being, bound by centuries of imprisonment. What do you want me to do? Aziza asked, her voice steady despite the rising storm within her. You must learn to wield the power of the Nkisi, Esi said. But beware, child. The power you seek can bring you great things, but it can also tear your world apart. You must understand the balance between strength and wisdom, or you will lose yourself. Aziza felt a wave of uncertainty wash over her, but the voice of the spirit resonated deeply within her. She wanted to prove herself, to become the protector of her people, to be the leader they needed. The spirit's words seemed to echo her own desires. The next morning, Aziza went to see Nana Kwaku, who had already noticed the change in her demeanor. The elder's sharp eyes studied her closely, sensing the restless energy that now radiated from her. You have been speaking to it, haven't you? Nana Kwaku's voice was not a question, but a statement. Aziza nodded slowly, her heart heavy with the knowledge that her secret was no longer hers alone. Esi speaks to me, Nana. It's real. The power of the Nkisi is real. Nana Kwaku's face tightened. Aziza, I warned you. You do not understand what you are dealing with. The Nkisi is not a tool to be used on a whim. It is not to be controlled, only respected. I understand, Nana, Aziza said quickly, though she could not deny the excitement that stirred within her. But I must learn, must understand how to use it. The Nkisi can protect us, it can bring prosperity to our people. The Nkisi is not a god, Nana Kwaku said firmly, it is a spirit, an ancient, powerful force. You cannot command it. You can only listen to its will, and that will is not always kind. Aziza's eyes widened. What do you mean? Nana Kwaku hesitated, then sighed. Many years ago, when my father was a young man, the Nkisi was brought to our village by a stranger who sought its power. He thought he could bend it to his will, and he succeeded, at first. The village flourished, crops grew abundant, and the people thrived. But with that power came greed. He became consumed by it. He asked for more wealth, more power, more control over the land. The Nkisi granted his requests, but it also took something from him. The land began to wither, crops failed, and the villagers suffered. It was as if the spirit was punishing them for their misuse of its power. Aziza felt a cold chill run down her spine as she listened. Her heart ached at the thought of her people suffering, but she could not ignore the pull she felt to the Nkisi. I have spoken to it, Nana, Aziza said softly. I have heard Yesai's voice. It says it can help us, if only we learn to understand it. Nana Kwaku's gaze softened, but his voice remained serious. If you truly believe this, Aziza, then you must be careful. Power is a dangerous thing, and once you open that door, it is not easily closed. Aziza nodded, her resolve hardening. I will not misuse it, Nana. I promise. Nana Kwaku did not answer immediately. Instead, he took a deep breath and placed a hand on her shoulder. Then you must seek the wisdom of the ancestors. There are rituals, ancient rites, that can help you learn to listen to the Nkisi, but you must approach it with respect. You cannot rush this, Aziza. The spirit will guide you, but only if you show the patience it requires. That evening, Nana Kwaku led Aziza to a secluded spot deep in the forest, where the ancient trees seemed to murmur with the voices of those long past. There, beneath the canopy of stars, the elder began to teach Aziza the old rites, chants and meditations meant to open her mind to the spirit world, to allow her to commune with Nkisi in ways that transcended the physical. As the nights passed, Aziza began to understand the ways of the spirits. She learned to quiet her mind, to listen for the whispers that came from beyond the veil. Esai's voice became clearer, and with it came visions of the past, images of ancient warriors, of great kings and queens, of the land before it was touched by human hands. But with each passing day, Aziza felt the growing weight of the power she was unlocking. It was not just the Nkisi that spoke to her, it was the spirits of the ancestors, who urged her to use the power she had found wisely, lest she fall into the same traps as those who had come before her. And yet, in the quiet corners of her mind, Aziza still heard the voice of Esai calling to her, urging her to use the power to protect her people. The choice, Aziza realized, was no longer just about understanding the Nkisi, it was about understanding herself, and the kind of leader she wanted to be. But as the whispers grew louder, Aziza knew that the path she had chosen was not one that could be easily undone. She was on the edge of a precipice, and the next step she took would determine the fate of her people and the land they called home. Aziza's training continued, but as the days passed, she could feel the mounting pressure of the Nkisi's power within her. Every day, the whispers from Esai grew louder, more insistent. The voice was no longer a gentle guiding presence but a force, a pulse that thrummed in the back of her mind. It urged her to use the power to bring prosperity to her people, to make the village of Akokofe flourish as it never had before. But Aziza knew she had to be careful. She had learned from Nana Kwaku's teachings that the Nkisi could bring both great blessings and devastating consequences. The temptation to use it for her people's benefit weighed heavily on her heart. Yet, in the quiet moments when she sat alone, the voice of Esai was impossible to ignore. One morning, as the sun rose over the jungle, Aziza made a decision. She could no longer wait. She would use the Nkisi's power to change things. Her people had suffered enough. They were struggling with crop failures, and the village's once thriving trade routes had dwindled to nothing. The neighboring kingdoms were encroaching on their land, threatening to erase the very identity of her people. Aziza could no longer sit idle, waiting for wisdom from the past. She would take matters into her own hands. That night, beneath a moonless sky, Aziza returned to the clearing where she had first communed with Nkisi. She brought the figure with her, the weight of it pressing against her chest like an unspoken promise. The forest around her seemed unnaturally still, as though the world itself was holding its breath. The Nkisi pulsed with energy as Aziza knelt before it. She closed her eyes, remembering the chants Nana Kwaku had taught her, the rituals meant to connect with the spirit world. But tonight, she did not just seek guidance, she sought power. I am ready, Aziza whispered. Show me the way, Esai. Grant me the strength to protect my people. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, the world seemed to tremble. The air grew thick with energy, and then Nkisi began to glow, its curvings shifting and rippling like water. Aziza could feel the presence of the spirit, its essence filling the space around her, its power flowing into her veins. A sharp pain pierced her chest, but it was not from the Nkisi. It was from something deeper, a pull in her soul, as though the spirit was testing her resolve. Her breath came in ragged gasps as the power surged within her, and she felt herself being consumed by it. "I trust you," she whispered, though she wasn't sure whether it was for the spirit or for herself. The energy seemed to respond to her, swelling and intensifying. And then, all at once, Aziza felt the land beneath her feet shift. The earth groaned, and a flash of light erupted from the ground, streaking into the sky. Aziza staggered back as the power coursed through her, overwhelming and intoxicating. When she opened her eyes, the world around her had changed. The jungle, once dense and untamed, now appeared to be shifting, growing faster than it should have. The air was thick with magic, and the ground seemed to pulse with life. But it was not just the jungle that had transformed. Far in the distance, Aziza could see a flash of green, a new wave of crops sprouting up from the earth, strong and fertile. The sky above was brighter, the clouds parting as if in response to the power she had just unleashed. Aziza breathed heavily, but her heart swelled with pride. Then Nkisi's power had granted her what she sought, prosperity for her people, the promise of abundance. She had done it. The village of Akokofe would thrive again. But as the exhilaration of success washed over her, she felt something else, a presence watching her from the shadows. "Aziza," a voice called from behind her. She turned to see Kwame, his dark eyes filled with suspicion and concern. He had always been skeptical of her obsession with Nkisi, but seeing her in this state, glowing with power, he knew something had changed. "What have you done?" he asked, his voice low but urgent. Aziza's heart skipped a beat. There was a flicker of doubt in her chest, but she quickly pushed it aside. "I've given our people what they need. I've brought them prosperity, Kwame. Look at the land, it is flourishing." Kwame's gaze flickered to the glowing figure of the Nkisi in her hands. "You don't understand what you've unleashed. This isn't prosperity, Aziza. It's chaos. This power doesn't come without a price." Aziza frowned, the weight of his words sinking in. "What do you mean?" "Look at the crops, look at the land. Our people will no longer suffer." But Kwame's expression grew darker. "You're not seeing it, Aziza. The land is shifting too fast. This is unnatural. You've taken what was meant to be a gift and turned it into something dangerous." "Then Nkisi does not give without taking." Aziza stepped back, her heart pounding. For a moment, she wondered if Kwame was right. The energy in the air felt different now, charged with something more volatile. But she refused to admit doubt. She had done what was needed. She had protected her people. "I've done what needed to be done," she repeated, her voice firm. "You don't understand, Kwame. The power of the Nkisi is mine to wield." Kwame shook his head, his expression one of deep sadness. "And that's the problem, Aziza. You think you can control it. But you can't. The Nkisi is a spirit, not a tool. You're playing with forces beyond your comprehension." Aziza turned away from him, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the land had changed, where the crops grew taller than ever before. But deep inside, a seed of doubt had been planted. The power was intoxicating, yes, but now, as the world around her thrummed with magic, Aziza could feel a deeper, darker force beginning to stir. She had summoned the power of the Nkisi, but she had not yet felt the full weight of what she had unleashed. And it was only a matter of time before the consequences would come. The days following Aziza's unleashing of the Nkisi's power were filled with both awe and dread. The land of Akokofe had transformed. Crops that had once struggled to grow now flourished with unnatural speed. The villagers marveled at the bounty of their harvest, the animals seemed more abundant, and the rivers flowed with an abundance that had not been seen in generations. At first, the people rejoiced, singing songs of praise for their protector, the one who had brought them prosperity. But as Aziza watched the fruits of her labor, a gnawing unease began to settle in her chest. She could feel the presence of the Nkisi everywhere, its power still pulsing within her, as if it were alive or watching her every move. She had harnessed its strength, but she had not yet learned how to control it. One evening, as the village celebrated their newfound prosperity, Aziza walked alone along the edge of the forest. The trees seemed to whisper to her, their leaves rustling with a language she did not understand. The night air was thick with the smell of earth and magic. There was something in the air, something shifting beneath the surface. Suddenly, the voice of Esi filled her mind. Aziza, the spirit whispered. You have taken what was not yours to take. The balance is broken. Aziza's heart clenched as she stopped in her tracks. What do you mean? The people are thriving. The land is alive. The land is alive, yes, Esi replied, but it is not in the way it should be. The land is overrun, overtaken by power that it cannot bear. The consequences will soon follow, and they will be dire. Aziza swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. What consequences? The power is a gift. The village is finally strong again. Strength can be deceiving, Aziza. What you have done has disturbed the natural order. The land is choking on the excess, the imbalance will consume you if you do not act swiftly. Aziza closed her eyes, struggling to comprehend what Esi was saying. She had been so consumed by the desire to protect her people, to see them prosper, that she had not fully considered the consequences of the power she had summoned. She turned and hurried back to the village, her mind racing. As she passed the fields, she could see the crops towering taller than ever, their vibrant green a stark contrast to the darkening sky above. But something was wrong. The air felt thick and heavy, and the ground beneath her feet trembled ever so slightly. When she arrived at the center of the village, the jubilant cries of her people suddenly seemed hollow. The joy in their voices faded as they, too, began to notice the unnatural stillness in the air. The ground began to crack, and a low, eerie rumble echoed from the distant mountains. Aziza's heart sank. No, she whispered. It's happening. At that moment, Kwame appeared at her side, his face drawn with worry. Aziza, we have to stop this. The land is reacting to the power you've invoked. It's becoming unstable. I know, Aziza replied, her voice trembling. But I didn't know it would be like this. I wanted to save them, I wanted to protect them. Kwame's gaze softened, but there was no time for comfort. You've done something that cannot be undone. The power of the Nkisi is too much for this world. We must find a way to return it. Aziza nodded, her mind racing. She could feel the power of the Nkisi thrumming within her, urging her to act, to use it once again to correct the wrong she had caused. But a deep sense of foreboding stopped her. The land was already beginning to crumble beneath her feet, and the power that had once seemed like salvation now felt like a curse. Aziza turned to face the elders, who had gathered at the center of the village. Nana Kwaku, his face drawn with concern, stepped forward. You must listen, Aziza, he said. The Nkisi cannot be used lightly. What you've done has disrupted the balance. Only by returning the power to the spirit can we hope to restore harmony. But how do I return it? Aziza asked desperately, her voice rising with panic. I can't undo what I've done. I don't know how. Nana Kwaku's eyes darkened with sorrow. You must go to the sacred grounds deep in the forest where the first Nkisi was created. There, you will find the path to returning what you have taken. But beware, the spirits will not forgive easily. Aziza's heart pounded in her chest. The idea of facing the consequences of her actions terrified her. But she had no choice. She had summoned the power, and now she had to face its price. Kwame placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice steady. I'll go with you. We'll face this together. Aziza nodded, grateful for his support. She turned to the villagers, who were now watching her with uncertain eyes. I have made a terrible mistake, she said, her voice trembling but firm. I must go into the forest and return the power to the Nkisi. I promise you, I will restore balance. The villagers murmured, but Aziza could see their trust in her begin to waver. She had been their savior, but now she was their only hope of undoing the destruction she had wrought. With Kwame by her side, Aziza set out toward the forest. The trees loomed ahead, their twisted branches seeming to reach out to her, as though they were warning her to turn back. But Aziza pressed on, her heart heavy with the weight of her actions. The deeper they ventured into the forest, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The air was thick with an unnatural stillness, and the shadows seemed to move in the corner of her vision. Every step felt as though they were being watched. At last, they reached the heart of the forest, the sacred grounds where the first Nkisi had been created. A circle of ancient stones stood in a clearing, their surfaces etched with markings similar to those on the Nkisi she had discovered. In the center of the circle lay a small pool of water, its surface still and reflective. Aziza stepped forward, her hands trembling as she held the Nkisi aloft. The power within her surged, and she could feel the presence of ESI stirring in her mind. It's time, Aziza, ESI's voice whispered. You must return what you have taken. Only then can you restore balance. Aziza took a deep breath and stepped into the center of the circle, lowering the Nkisi into the pool of water. The moment it touched the surface, the air around them seemed to crackle with energy. A blinding light enveloped the clearing, and the ground beneath their feet began to tremble violently. Aziza's heart raced as the power of the Nkisi surged around her, pulling her into the spirit world. She felt herself being drawn into the heart of the energy, the voices of the ancestors filling her mind. You have come to correct your mistake, a voice said, deep and resonant. Aziza could not see the speaker, but the power of the words resonated through her entire being. But remember, child, the power of the Nkisi cannot be wielded without consequence. You have learned what happens when you seek to control it. Aziza's vision blurred, and the power around her grew unbearable. I did not mean to cause harm, she cried out. I only wanted to protect my people. Please, help me restore balance. The voice was silent for a moment before responding. To restore balance, you must give up what you have gained. The Nkisi's power comes at a cost. Are you willing to pay that price? Aziza felt her heart sink. The price. What would she have to sacrifice to undo the damage she had caused? Aziza's mind reeled as the voice of the spirit echoed in her mind. She could feel the weight of her actions pressing down on her like a mountain, and the power of the Nkisi that had once filled her with exhilaration now felt like an anchor pulling her into the depths of the earth. The energy around her was suffocating, and she struggled to breathe as she tried to understand what the spirit was asking of her. To restore balance, you must give up what you have gained. The Nkisi's power comes at a cost, the voice said again, its tone resonating like thunder in the stillness. Are you willing to pay that price? Aziza's heart pounded in her chest, and her palms grew sleek with sweat. She had known there would be consequences, but the reality of it was overwhelming. The villagers had suffered for so long, and she had promised them prosperity, security. Now, she faced the possibility of losing everything she had fought for. Her eyes flicked toward Kwame, who stood beside her, his face a mixture of concern and understanding. He had always been the voice of reason, the one who had cautioned her against seeking the power of the Nkisi. Now, he remained silent, waiting for her to make her choice. Aziza felt a pang of guilt. She had wanted to protect her people, to see them thrive. But in her quest for power, she had overlooked the delicate balance that sustained their world. The Nkisi was not a tool to be wielded, but a force of nature to be respected. I didn't mean to cause harm, Aziza whispered to the spirit, her voice trembling. I only wanted to help them, to bring them what they deserved. The voice was quiet for a moment, as if weighing her words. Then, it spoke again, its tone softened but firm. The intention behind your actions matters not, child. It is the consequences that must be faced. To restore what has been disturbed, you must give up what you have taken. The power of the Nkisi cannot remain in your hands without devastating consequences. The land, the people, everything you have worked for, will be undone unless you make the sacrifice. Aziza's chest tightened as the weight of the choice pressed down on her. The power of the Nkisi had already changed the world around her. The crops, the land, the very air had been transformed. Could she bear to let it all go? Could she undo the very thing she had brought to life? I will do whatever it takes, Aziza said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. Tell me what I must do. The spirit's voice was gentle now. The cost is great, Aziza. You must return the power to the earth. The Nkisi's energy must be released, but it cannot be done without sacrifice. To restore the balance, you must surrender what you hold dear, the power within you, the essence of the Nkisi. And with it, the land's prosperity will fade. Aziza swallowed hard, her thoughts racing. The land that had flourished with magic, the bounty that had lifted her people from despair, would all vanish. The crops, the rivers, the forests would return to their natural state, and the village of Akokofe would face another season of struggle. But in return, the balance would be restored. She thought of her people, of the villagers who had placed their trust in her. They had already suffered so much, and she had promised them a future free of hardship. Could she bear to take that promise back? And yet, the weight of the Nkisi's power, the toll it was taking on the land and her spirit, was undeniable. It was a power that demanded respect and reverence, not dominance. She had used it recklessly, when now she had to face the consequences. Aziza took a deep breath, closing her eyes as she gathered her courage. I will return the power, she said, her voice quiet but resolute. I will release it, so that the balance can be restored. The spirit's presence seemed to grow stronger, and the energy in the clearing swirled around her. She could feel the pull of the Nkisi, its power wrapping around her like an invisible thread. The air crackled, and the ground beneath her feet trembled as the spirit began to withdraw the energy that Aziza had summoned. She held the Nkisi in her hands, her fingers trembling as the figure began to glow once more, brighter than ever before. A surge of power rushed through her, and she felt as though her very soul were being torn in two. The sacrifice was not just physical, it was spiritual, a severing of the bond she had forged with Nkisi. Aziza felt the weight of her choice in every fiber of her being. The power that had once been her salvation was now a burden, and she was forced to relinquish it. With one final, heart-wrenching breath, she released the Nkisi into the pool of water at her feet. The moment the figure touched the surface, a shockwave of energy rippled through the clearing, and Aziza felt the power leave her body, like a great wave receding into the ocean. The land around her seemed to breathe again, the tension in the air lifting as the balance was restored. But as the magic faded, so too did the prosperity. The crops withered, the rivers slowed, and the lush growth that had overtaken the land began to fade. The village of Akokofe would have to face another season of hardship. The struggle for survival would return. Aziza collapsed to her knees, her body exhausted from the strain of the sacrifice. She had given everything, her power, her connection to the Nkisi, and the promise of a better future for her people. She had returned the balance, but at what cost? Kwame knelt beside her, his expression a mixture of concern and admiration. You did the right thing, Aziza. The land will heal, but it will take time. And so will you. Aziza looked up at him, her eyes filled with both sorrow and relief. I hope so, Kwame. I hope they understand. From the distance, the voices of the villagers began to reach them. They had felt the change in the air, and they were coming to see what had happened. Aziza stood slowly, her legs shaky but determined. She had faced the power of the Nkisi, and she had learned the true cost of wielding such power. She had given up what she had once thought was her greatest gift, and in doing so, she had restored the balance. As the villagers gathered around her, their faces filled with uncertainty, Aziza knew that her journey was far from over. She had not solved all of their problems, nor had she brought them the permanent prosperity she had hoped for. But she had given them something more important, the wisdom to understand the consequences of their actions and the strength to endure whatever challenges lay ahead. The balance had been restored, but it was a fragile thing. And as Aziza looked out at the land that had once again become her responsibility, she knew that her true work was just beginning.